Welcome, night owls, to another unsettling tale from Murmurs at 3 a.m. Tonight we delve into the chilling depths of Havenwood, a town shrouded in silence and steeped in a secret that has bled into its very soil for centuries. Meet Clara Vance, a woman haunted by her own crushing grief, seeking solace in her grandmother's secluded Maine farmhouse. But Havenwood offers no peace. Instead, she unearths a cursed diary, its brittle pages whispering the forgotten fears of Ella Rathorn, a local girl who vanished decades ago. As Clara reads, her reality twists. Antique mirrors reveal terrifying reflections, static clocks pulse with phantom rhythms, and the vast cornfields outside her window seem to breathe with an ancient malevolence. Is she losing her mind? Or is Elara's desperate spirit reaching out, guiding her to uncover a horrifying truth the town elders have sacrificed everything to conceal? Prepare for a journey into folk horror and psychological dread, where the line between grief and possession blurs, and unexplained rituals demand a chilling price. Can Claire break a centuries-old cycle, or will she become Havenwood's next harvest offering? Tune in now, if you dare, to Murmurs at 3 a.m., and find out what truly whispers in the stalks. Don't miss this unsettling story, brought to you by Murmurs at 3 a.m.
The dust motes danced in the lone shaft of sunlight slicing through the attic window, illuminating the forgotten relics of a life Clara Vance had scarcely known. Havenwood, Maine. A name that felt less like a town and more like a sigh escaping a forgotten tomb. She hadn't set foot in this sleepy, isolated pocket of New England since her grandmother's funeral 8 years ago, and even then her visits had been fleeting, overshadowed by a pervasive sense of unease. Now, Havenwood was her sanctuary, or so she hoped, from the gnawing grief that had followed her like a shadow from Boston. It had been 6 months since the accident. 6 months since the rain-slicked road, the sudden swerve, and the sickening crunch of metal that had stolen Lily, her younger sister, from her life. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in her gut, a constant whisper in the back of her mind. "You were driving, Clara. You should have." She'd abandoned her marketing job, her city apartment, everything that reminded her of the life before. Her grandmother's will, a lifeline she hadn't known she needed, had offered this dilapidated farmhouse as a refuge. The house itself was a sprawling, faded sentinel overlooking acres of what had once been farmland, now mostly overgrown woods and a single vast field of corn that stretched to the horizon, its dry stalks rustling with an ominous, incessant sound. The air here was different, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something metallic and old. As she'd driven the winding, narrow road into town, the welcome sign, Havenwood, Est 1792, a legacy of peace, seemed less an invitation and more a grim jest. The houses were weathered, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, their windows dark like unblinking eyes. Inside the farmhouse, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of old timbers and the rustle of unseen things in the walls. Claire had spent the first few days simply existing, unpacking boxes filled with memories, some precious, some painful. She found herself drawn to the antique clocks dotted throughout the house, all stopped at various times, their frozen faces mocking the relentless march of time that had brought her here. She felt watched, a prickling sensation on her nape, a feeling that intensified when she stood before the large, ornate mirror in the main hallway. Its silvered surface, tarnished with age spots, seemed to hold more than just her reflection. Sometimes, in the periphery, she thought she saw fleeting shadows behind her, just out of sight, amorphous shapes that vanished the moment she turned her head. Tonight the wind had picked up, rattling the loose panes in the attic. Claire had decided to tackle the attic first, a purgatory task of sifting through generations of accumulated dust and secrets. She uncovered trunks filled with yellowed linens, moth-eaten clothes, and brittle photographs of people she didn't recognize, their smiles frozen in time. She coughed, the air thick with the scent of age and mildew. As she knelt, prying open a particularly stubborn iron-bound chest tucked beneath a sagging rafter, A chill permeated the air, raising goosebumps on her arms. It wasn't just the draft. It was a cold that felt deliberate. Inside the chest, nestled amongst mothballs and brittle newspapers, was not what she expected. No linens, no photo albums. Instead, her fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. A small, dark wooden box, intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize. And beneath it, a single child-sized shoe, scuffed and worn, tied with a faded ribbon. It felt impossibly cold to the touch. A floorboard creaked directly behind her. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't alone. The scent of damp earth and something acrid, like burning hair, filled her nostrils. She slowly, cautiously turned her head. Nothing. Only the familiar, comforting, if dusty, stacks of old boxes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Just the house settling, she told herself, the wind playing tricks. But the feeling of being watched intensified, a malevolent presence pressing in on her. She snatched the wooden box, ignoring the shoe, and scrambled out of the attic, her mind racing. The shadows in the hallway seemed deeper, the silence of the house heavier. She retreated to the relative safety of the living room, the evening light outside fading into a bruised purple. She clutched the box, her knuckles white. Havenwood wasn't offering her peace. It was offering something else entirely. Something ancient and unsettling. And she had a horrifying suspicion that it had been waiting for her.
The carved box felt heavy in Clara's hands, its surface cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. She'd brought it downstairs, along with the single shoe, placing them on the dust-sheeted coffee table like artifacts from an excavation. The living room, despite its relative warmth from the small electric heater, still felt vast and empty. The clocks on the mantelpiece, all frozen, seemed to tick in her imagination, their phantom rhythm out of sync with her own racing heart. She tried to rationalize the events of the attic. Grief, exhaustion, the unsettling atmosphere of an old, unfamiliar house. They could all conspire to make her jump at shadows. Yet the cold spot, the distinct creak of the floorboard, the acrid scent that lingered even now in her nose, those were harder to dismiss. The carved box refused to open easily. There was no visible latch, no obvious seam. Clara ran her fingers over the symbols again, a series of looping, almost vine-like patterns that seemed to writhe and intertwine. They felt strangely familiar, as if from a forgotten dream. After several minutes of fruitless prodding, she noticed a tiny, almost invisible indentation on one side. She pressed it, and with a soft click, the lid sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried, brittle wildflowers, was a single object. A worn, leather-bound diary. Its pages were yellowed and fragile. The ink faded in places, but the handwriting was elegant, looping, and distinctly feminine. There was no name on the cover, only a faint, stylized drawing of a scarecrow against a backdrop of cornstalks. A jolt went through her. A diary. A direct link to a past she was starting to suspect was far more intricate than simple family history. She ignored the insistent pounding at the base of her skull, the clamor of her rational mind screaming for her to put it back, to leave Havenwood, to run. Her fingers, almost of their own accord, flipped open the cover. The first entry was dated October 12th, 1988. Another harvest moon. The air is crisp, the corn almost ready. Mama says it's a good year. Papa just grunts. He's been distant lately. I wish he'd smile more. Havenwood feels quiet tonight. Too quiet. Like the town is holding its breath. The voice in her head, reading the words, felt eerily close, like a whisper against her ear. Clara shivered, pulling a throw blanket tighter around her shoulders. She read another entry and another. The diary chronicled the mundane life of a teenage girl, school, friends, crushes, the small-town gossip. But slowly, subtly, the tone shifted. November 3rd. There are new shadows in the cornfields at night. Not just the moonlight. I see them move. Mama says it's just the wind, but the wind doesn't stand still and watch. December 1st. He came again last night, tall, silent, like a scarecrow without a face. He stood by my window. I didn't breathe. I just watched him watch me. I think he wants something. Clara's blood ran cold. A scarecrow without a face. The drawing on the diary cover. The shadows she'd been seeing. It was too much to be coincidence. A sudden, sharp rap echoed through the house, seeming to come from every direction at once. It was not a knock on the door, but a single, resonant thump, like something heavy had fallen upstairs. Or like someone had dropped something inside the house. Her heart leapt into her throat. She remembered the creak in the attic, the feeling of being watched. She slowly rose, the diary clutched in her hand, her eyes darting around the darkening room. The hallway mirror seemed to shimmer, its reflections wavering. For a split second, she saw not her own face, but a distorted, pale visage, wide-eyed with terror, framed by long, dark hair. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her own startled reflection. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words seemed to dissipate into the heavy silence. The rap came again, this time undeniably from the kitchen, a metallic clang that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Clara's breath hitched. She hadn't heard anyone enter. She lived alone. She was alone. But was she? She edged towards the kitchen doorway, her hand reaching for the old, heavy iron poker beside the fireplace. The light from the living room didn't quite reach the kitchen's far corners, leaving them shrouded in deeper shadow. The air grew colder, the acrid scent from the attic returning, stronger this time, almost choking her. She peered into the darkness. On the counter, lying perfectly flat where she had left it leaning against the wall, was the largest of her grandmother's kitchen knives, and directly beneath it, a small, intricate carving of a cornstalk freshly etched into the wooden countertop. It hadn't been there before. The knife seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. Clara backed away slowly, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. This wasn't grief. This wasn't her imagination. Something was here, in this house, and it knew she was here. And it was trying to tell her something, or perhaps warn her. Sleep offered no respite. Clara tossed and turned, haunted by the images from the diary and the unsettling reality of the knife. Dreams bled into waking, visions of endless cornfields under a bruised, moonless sky, and a tall, faceless figure standing sentinel among the stalks. When she finally jolted awake, the first rays of dawn were just painting the sky a fragile gray. Her body ached, not from exertion, but from a pervasive chill that seemed to have settled deep within her bones. She tried to shake off the lingering fear. Her first instinct was to flee, to pack her bags, abandon the house, and never look back. But then a different feeling took root, a stubborn curiosity mixed with a strange, almost empathic connection to the girl in the diary. Who was she? What had happened to her? And why did her story feel so intimately connected to Clara's own arrival in Havenwood? After a lukewarm shower, Clara ventured out, needing to feel the solidity of the town beneath her feet, to find some anchor in the escalating weirdness. Havenwood was even smaller than she remembered. A single main street, a post office that doubled as a general store, a diner with faded neon, and a church whose steeple seemed to lean precariously against the sky. She started at the general store, hoping for a friendly face, a local to chat with. The proprietor, a thin, stern woman with a perpetually pursed lip, eyed Clara with a suspicion that bordered on hostility. Clara asked about the town's history, vaguely mentioning old families or local legends. The woman merely grunted, rearranging cans of beans.
Old families keep to themselves, she said, her voice flat. And legends are just that, tales for children. Havenwood is a quiet place. The interaction left Clara feeling colder than before. The town's quietness now felt less peaceful and more like a carefully guarded secret. Undeterred, she found the local library, a small, charming building crammed with more dust than books. The librarian, a kindly-looking woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, seemed more approachable. Her name was Agnes Miller, and she greeted Clara with a wary but polite smile. "You're Eleanor Vance's granddaughter, aren't you?" Agnes said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thought I recognized the family eyes." Clara nodded, relieved to find someone who remembered her grandmother. "Yes, Clara. I'm staying in the old house for a while." She hesitated, then plunged in. "I was going through some of my grandmother's things, and I found an old diary. It talks about strange things happening around here back in the late 80s. There's a mention of a scarecrow and shadows in the cornfields." Agnes's smile faltered. A flicker of something, fear, sadness, crossed her face. She smoothed the pages of the book she was holding. "The 80s, you say?" Her voice was suddenly guarded. "Havenwood has always been a quiet town, dear. Not much ever happens." "This girl," Clara pressed, pulling out her phone and showing a photo she'd taken of one of the diary entries. "She writes about a scarecrow and shadows in the cornfields." Agnes peered at the screen, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly as she saw the familiar script. She swallowed hard. "That looks like Ilara Torn's hand." Clara's heart pounded. "Ilara Torn?" Agnes sighed, a long, mournful sound. Ilara Torn, a bright, sweet girl, disappeared without a trace, almost 35 years ago now. Senior year. Never found a body, just disappeared. Folks said she ran away, couldn't take the quiet life, but her mama always said otherwise. Said Ilara wouldn't have left without a word. "What did her mother say?" Clara asked, leaning closer. Agnes looked around, as if expecting someone to overhear. "She said Ilara was scared. She said she'd been seeing things, hearing things. Said Havenwood had taken her daughter. People just thought she was distraught, but some of us wondered." "Wondered what?" Agnes lowered her voice. "There are old stories in Havenwood, Clara. Stories about the land, about what it demands for a good harvest. Things folks don't talk about much anymore. Legends that predate even this town." She gestured vaguely toward the window, where the vast, whispering cornfields were visible in the distance. The Torns, they were old farmers, deeply rooted in the land. Perhaps too deeply. Clara felt a cold dread settle over her. "You think Ilara's disappearance was connected to those stories?" Agnes's eyes, clouded with age and unspoken anxieties, met Clara's. "I don't think it, child. I know it. And the fact that you found her diary, it means she wants you to know too." Suddenly, the library felt less safe. The dusty silence seemed to press in, filled with the ghosts of unspoken truths. As Clara walked out into the crisp autumn air, she glanced back at the library. Through the window, she saw Agnes standing, watching her, her expression a mixture of warning and grim resignation. Clara knew then that Ilara Torn hadn't just vanished, she had been taken, and the town of Havenwood, with its placid facade, was a tomb built on a terrible secret. She looked at her reflection in the darkened glass of the library door. Her own eyes, usually so guarded, now held a fierce, determined spark. She would find out what happened to Ilara Torn.
Back in the grim solitude of her grandmother's house, The diary of Alara Thorne became Clara's sole focus. She locked the front door, drew the heavy curtains against the encroaching twilight, and settled into the armchair. The worn leather of the book, a tangible link to the past. The air around her felt charged, heavy with the weight of unseen presences, but her growing obsession overshadowed her fear. She had to know. Alara's entries, once mundane, steadily descended into a chilling chronicle of terror. The elegant handwriting grew spidery, frantic, reflecting a mind under siege. January 15th. Papa says I'm imagining things. Mama just cries. But I see them. The shadows in the cornfield aren't just shadows anymore. They're watchers. And the scarecrow, it moved again. Its head turned. I swear it did. Clara shivered, remembering the chilling sketch on the diary's cover. The diary also started mentioning specific places: an old stone well near the edge of the Thorne property, a clearing deep within the cornfield where circles of stones lay, and a meeting house that wasn't on any map. March 7th. They left something on the porch again, a garland of dried corn husks and animal bones. It smells like rot and something sweet, like old blood. They want me to join, to be part of the harvest. I can't. I won't. The they. It was an unspoken, terrifying entity, hinted at, but never explicitly named. It was clear Alara believed a group was involved, not just a singular entity. The words jumped off the page, painting a vivid picture of a young girl's growing isolation and fear, ignored by her family, who perhaps were in denial, or worse, complicit. As Clara read, the house around her seemed to respond. The air grew colder in the room, despite the heater humming. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound started coming from behind the wall near the fireplace, like fingernails dragging on plaster. Clara tried to ignore it, focusing on Alara's desperate words. April 20th. Today is the feast of first sprouts. They were out in the fields chanting. I saw the mayor there, and Mr. Henderson from the general store. My own father. He was with them. He looked at me, just once, with such cold eyes. Mama pretends not to see. What have they done? Clara gasped. The mayor, Mr. Henderson, the general store owner, the very people who had been so dismissive, so resistant to her questions. Agnes had warned her. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a deeply rooted corruption, a chilling conspiracy. Suddenly, a photograph slipped from between the brittle pages of the diary. It was a faded Polaroid showing a group of stern-faced people in old-fashioned clothes standing in a field. In the center, almost obscured by a strange blur, was a tall, crude scarecrow. And standing directly in front of the scarecrow, looking directly at the camera with wide, terrified eyes, was a young woman who could only be Alara. Her face was pale, almost translucent. But what truly sent a jolt of horror through Clara was the small, child-sized shoe visible in the foreground, tucked into the dry earth, identical to the one she'd found in the attic chest. A profound sense of despair washed over Clara, so strong it felt like it wasn't her own. It was Alara's despair, reaching across the decades, infecting her. A low, guttural moan seemed to emanate from the very floorboards beneath her feet. The scratching in the wall intensified, sounding less like fingernails and more like something desperately trying to claw its way out. Clara's own trauma, usually a dull ache, sharpened into a crippling agony. She saw Lily's face, bright and smiling, then distorted by impact, her eyes vacant. You killed her, Clara, just like they killed me. The thought wasn't her own. It was a cold accusatory whisper that seemed to echo Alara's pain, twisting it with Clara's guilt. Her breath hitched.
The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, coalescing, and she saw a flicker of a gaunt, terrified face within them, reflected in the dark glass of the window, just for a moment. The diary dropped from her trembling fingers onto the floor. The scratch, scratch, scratch behind the wall became a frantic tearing, then a sickening thump. And then silence. A deafening, absolute silence. Clara sat, rigid with terror, the phantom accusation still ringing in her ears, her own guilt intertwining with Ilara's tragic fate. She was no longer just a spectator to a ghost story. She was becoming a participant, drawn into a web woven from the town's dark past and her own crushing sorrow.
The oppressive silence that followed the scratching and thump was more terrifying than the noise itself. Clara sat frozen, the diary abandoned at her feet, her gaze fixed on the wall where the sounds had come from. Every nerve ending screamed. The accusation, "You killed her," echoed, indistinguishable now from her own internal monologue. Ilara's despair had truly found a home in Clara's guilt. She finally forced herself to move, scrambling to her feet, her limbs heavy with dread. Her eyes were drawn, as if by an invisible string, to the hallway mirror. The antique mirror, once merely a dusty relic, now felt like a portal, a place where the veil between worlds thinned. Its tarnished surface seemed to writhe, the faint reflections of the living room wavering. She approached it cautiously, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her own reflection stared back, pale and drawn, haunted by sleepless nights and escalating fear. But then slowly, subtly, her reflection began to distort. Her features elongated, her eyes widened into impossible proportions, filled with a primal, unspeakable terror. Her hair, in the reflection, seemed to grow longer, darker, framing a face that was unmistakably Ilara's. It was a fleeting, horrifying tableau, Clara's face superimposed with the ghosts, emerging of their suffering. "No," Clara whispered, stumbling backward. The image in the mirror rippled, then settled back into her horrified reflection. But the cold presence in the room had intensified, thick and suffocating, smelling faintly of the dried earth and that same metallic burnt scent. She felt a soft, cold brush against her arm, like a feather, but it left a chill that burrowed deep into her flesh. She spun around but saw nothing. The shadows in the corners of the hall seemed to deepen, to gather, taking on the faint outline of a slender, standing figure. She could almost make out long, dark hair, obscuring a face that would be too terrible to behold. The figure didn't move, but the air around it shimmered with a palpable sorrow and a simmering rage. Clara's mind raced, desperate for an explanation, for a way to ground herself. Was she losing it? Was her grief finally tipping her into madness? The guilt over Lily's death had always been a weight, but now it felt like a suffocating blanket, smothering her sanity. She saw Lily again, laughing in the passenger seat, then screaming. The screams became Ilara's, echoing in her mind, indistinguishable, interwoven. Suddenly, a voice, faint but clear, whispered from the direction of the mirror, "Find the well." The words were ethereal, chilling, but distinct. Clara's breath hitched. She knew of an old well, mentioned in the diary, near the edge of the Thorn farm. Ilara had written about it as a place she sometimes went to hide, to think, but also with a growing sense of dread. Driven by a desperate need for answers, and perhaps a need to escape the confines of the house, Clara snatched up the diary and hurried out. The late afternoon sun was already sinking, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown yard. The outside air was crisp, colder than it should be for autumn. The vast cornfields beyond her property line seemed to loom, their dry stalks rustling with an ancient, knowing sound. She knew the general direction of the Thorn farm from vague memories and the map in her mind that Agnes had conjured. The road leading to it was little more than a dirt track, barely visible beneath a canopy of gnarled, ancient trees whose branches clawed at the bruised sky.
As she walked, a low mist began to creep in from the fields, swirling around her ankles, blurring the edges of the world. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her jump. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch and contort into grotesque shapes, mimicking the faceless scarecrow from Alara's nightmares. She gripped the diary tighter, its pages feeling like a lifeline. The whispers intensified, carried on the wind a chorus of faint, sorrowful voices that seemed to lament and accuse. "Don't trust them. They lie. It takes." Clara pressed on, her resolve hardening with each step. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it a burning determination had ignited. Ilara's spirit was reaching out, guiding her, and Clara, carrying her own burden of grief and guilt, knew she had to answer. The well. It held a piece of the puzzle, and she was going to find it, no matter what horrors lurked in the deepening shadows of Havenwood.
The dirt track dissolved into a narrow, overgrown path, swallowed by the encroaching woods that bordered the old Thorn farm. The mist had thickened, swirling around Clara's knees, making the ancient trees appear as spectral sentinels. The air grew heavy, damp and smelling of decaying vegetation and that persistent, metallic scent. Each snap of a twig beneath her worn boots echoed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Alara's diary had been explicit about the location of the well. Beyond the forgotten fence line, where the maples grow thickest, at the edge of the northern cornfield. Clara pushed through thorny brambles, her clothes catching on unseen snags, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The deepening twilight made it impossible to discern anything clearly, the world reduced to shades of gray and shifting shadows. Then, through a break in the trees, she saw it. The vast expanse of the cornfield. Taller than any man, the dry stalks rustled with a sound like whispering secrets, an undulating sea stretching into the hazy distance. And there, standing like a grotesque sentinel at the very edge of the field, was a scarecrow. It was not a friendly, charming figure. This scarecrow was ancient, its burlap head devoid of features, its straw stuffing spilling from tattered clothes that hung like rags on its wooden crossframe. Its arms, crudely fashioned from thick branches, seemed to reach out, beckoning or warning. Clara felt a primal dread, remembering Alara's entries. This was the scarecrow. A low, mournful moan drifted from within the cornfield, so soft it could have been the wind. But Clara felt it resonate deep within her chest, a profound sense of sorrow. She pushed past the scarecrow, ignoring the prickling sensation on her skin, and began to search for the well. The ground here was uneven, littered with fallen branches and decaying leaves. The air was colder, the mist thicker. And then she saw it. A crumbling stone wall, barely discernible, marking the perimeter of what must have been the old Thorn property. Beyond it, a cluster of gnarled maples, their branches skeletal against the sky. And beneath them, partially obscured by overgrowth, was the well. It was ancient. Its stone rim cracked and moss-covered, the iron crank rusted into immobility. The darkness within its depths seemed absolute, a gaping maw into the earth. A chill radiated from it, a cold that felt like it came from the very core of the planet. Clara knelt, peering into the blackness. The faint metallic burnt smell was strongest here. As she leaned closer, a single, clear whisper rose from the depths. "The blood, it cries." Her breath hitched. She instinctively recoiled, stumbling back from the edge. The ground beneath her feet was disturbingly soft. She looked down. The earth was dark, almost black, and damp, even though there had been no recent rain. Her hand brushed against something cold and slick.
She pulled it back, staring at her palm. It was stained with a dark, viscous liquid that smelled unmistakably of old, dried blood. A wave of nausea hit her. This wasn't just a well, it was a repository, a place where something terrible had happened and continued to happen. From within the cornfield, directly behind her, came a soft, rhythmic shuffling, not the wind, something heavy dragging through the dry stalks. Clara slowly turned. The mist had begun to swirl more violently within the field, coalescing into indistinct shapes. One shape in particular seemed to grow, to gain definition, towering over the rustling stalks. It was tall, impossibly slender, a dark silhouette against the fading light. It was the faceless scarecrow, but it was moving, slowly, deliberately towards her, its tattered arms outstretched. A primal scream tore through Clara's throat. This was no psychological trick, no hallucination induced by grief. This was real, and it was coming for her. She scrambled to her feet, abandoning caution, and fled. She ran blindly, stumbling through the tangled undergrowth, the whispering cornstalks seeming to close in around her, the chilling shuffling sound pursuing her relentlessly. The shadows elongated, writhed, becoming monstrous, reaching clawed fingers from the surrounding trees. She didn't stop until she burst out onto the main road, gasping for air, her lungs burning, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She glanced back. The edge of the woods was silent, motionless, the cornfield a dark, impassive wall. But she knew it had been there. It was still there, and it would be waiting. The well, the blood, the moving scarecrow, all of it confirmed the horrors Alara had described. Havenwood was steeped in something ancient and malevolent, and she had just stepped into its twisted heart.
Clara spent the night huddled in her grandmother's armchair, the diary clutched to her chest, the house's creaks and groans no longer comforting but menacing. The image of the moving scarecrow, its silent, relentless advance, was burned into her mind. The smell of old blood on her hand, no matter how many times she washed it, lingered as a phantom sensation. She was no longer just investigating, she was embroiled. Morning brought a chilling clarity. She had to find Agnes Miller. The librarian was the only person who seemed to possess even a fraction of the truth. And Clara needed answers, real answers, not just Ilara's terrified confessions. She arrived at the library just as Agnes was unlocking the doors. The old woman's eyes, as they met Clara's, were filled with a knowing sorrow. "You found the well, didn't you, dear?" Agnes's voice was soft, resigned. Clara nodded, her throat tight. And the scarecrow. It moved, Agnes. It was real. Agnes sighed, leading Clara inside and closing the door behind them as if to seal out the watchful eyes of Havenwood. She moved to a dusty section of local history, pulling out an ancient leather-bound ledger. "Come, sit, child. It's time you knew the real story of Havenwood." Agnes began to speak, her voice low, weaving a narrative that was both horrifying and strangely compelling. This town, Clara, wasn't always called Havenwood. It was originally called Harvester's Haven by the first settlers, a small community of farmers seeking fertile land. But the land here, it was stubborn. The early harvests were poor, the winters harsh. Starvation was a real threat. Then a desperate whisper began to circulate among the most ancient families, stories from the old country, about pacts with the land itself, about the earth demanding its due. Clara listened, a knot forming in her stomach.
What kind of dew? A life, Agnes whispered, her eyes meeting Clara's. A sacrifice, to ensure the bounty of the harvest. The first year it was just one of the livestock, a particularly strong ox. The harvest was plentiful that year. It reinforced their belief. Over the generations, the belief twisted. The demands of the land grew. The sacrifices became different. She opened the ledger. Its pages were filled with meticulous looping script dating back centuries. Each page listed a name, a date, and a brief, chilling notation. Given to the stalks for the season's bounty. They selected someone isolated, someone without strong family ties who wouldn't be missed, or someone who just simply fit the criteria of the prophecy. A seed to nourish the ground, always around the time of the spring planting or the late autumn harvest, and always a young, vital life. For a very long time, it was an unspoken secret passed down among the founding families. It ensured the town's prosperity, its very survival. Ilara Thorne, Clara breathed, a horrifying realization dawning. She was the senior student, the chosen one. Agnes nodded, tears welling in her ancient eyes. Her family, the Thornes, were among the oldest and most devout. Her father, he truly believed it was his duty, his family's duty, to offer his own. A tradition so ingrained it became a monstrous normalcy. Ilara had started to question. She was smart, rebellious. She saw the signs, the old symbols, the way the community elders would gather. She knew. They tried to silence her, to make her believe she was going mad. Her diary was her only outlet, her only truth. Agnes pointed to an entry in the ledger. October 22nd, 1988. Ilara Thorne, taken. Clara felt a wave of cold fury mixed with a profound sadness. And the town just let it happen? Some were complicit, Agnes said, her voice heavy with shame. Many were afraid. And a few, like me, were just children then, helpless. But the power of the harvest keepers, as they call themselves, is absolute in this town. They control everything. They believe they protect Havenwood, that without the sacrifices, the land will turn against us, the crops will fail, the town will wither and die. She closed the ledger with a heavy thud, the sound echoing in the silent library. The Harvest Festival, Clara. It's coming this weekend. It's not just a celebration. It's when the cycle renews. And her spirit, Ilara's spirit, it's been restless for a very long time. It wants to be free. It wants the truth to be known. Agnes grasped Clara's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You are an outsider, Clara. You're not bound by their silence, but you must be careful. They will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Leave Havenwood, child, please, before you become another offering. But Clara shook her head, a grim determination setting in. The echoes of Lily's death, the weight of her own guilt, intertwined with Ilara's tragic fate. She couldn't leave, not now, not when she had come so close to understanding. Ilara's ghost wasn't just haunting her, it was calling to her, seeking justice. And Clara finally understood why. The Harvest Festival was not just a date on a calendar, it was the chilling climax to a centuries-old horror.
The days leading up to the Harvest Festival passed in a blur of escalating dread and spectral manifestations. Ilara's presence in the house was undeniable now, a constant, mournful hum in the air. The antique clocks in the house, long stopped, now occasionally ticked with a frantic, erratic rhythm, their hands jumping wildly as if trying to keep pace with the accelerating horror. The shadows in the periphery of Clara's vision were no longer fleeting. They writhed, coalesced, sometimes forming the distinct, emaciated silhouette of a young girl, her head bowed in despair. The mirror in the hallway had become a focal point of Alara's desperate attempts to communicate. Reflections of Havenwood's past flickered across its surface, glimpses of townsfolk in archaic clothing, their faces grim. A chilling scene of a small, frightened girl being led into the cornfields, obscured by a swirling mist. Clara saw her own face, reflected, growing paler, gaunt, her eyes mirroring Ilara's terror. Her guilt over Lily's death, already a raw wound, became a pulsating agony. Ilara's ghostly whispers, now clearer, mingled with the accusatory voice of her own trauma. You could have saved her, just like they could have saved me. Clara felt herself teetering on the edge of madness. Sleep was impossible, plagued by nightmares of being buried alive beneath the earth, suffocated by cornstalks. She walked the house like a phantom herself, driven by a singular, consuming purpose: to break the cycle. The Harvest Festival, held in the town square, was a grotesque parody of celebration. Despite the cheerful bunting and the smell of spiced cider, an undercurrent of unease permeated the air. The townsfolk, those she'd recognized from the general store, the mayor, older men and women with hard, unreadable eyes, moved with a forced joviality that didn't quite hide their nervous glances towards the vast cornfields that bordered the town. Clara saw the elaborate, newly erected scarecrows, each one eerily lifelike, positioned around the town square, their blank faces seeming to watch the festivities with a knowing malice. Agnes had told her the true ritual took place not in the town square, but deep within the cornfields, at a sacred, hidden place only known to the harvest keepers. It would happen at the stroke of midnight, under the harvest moon, the annual blessing of the fields. Clara clutched Alara's diary, now her most cherished possession, a silent vow passing between her and the long-dead girl. The diary contained not only Ilara's story, but also a crude map drawn on its final pages, leading to the meeting house in the cornfields, the heart of the ritual. As dusk began to settle, the air grew colder, and a thin, unnatural mist began to creep in from the fields. The sounds of the festival grew muted, distorted, as if a shroud was slowly descending over Havenwood. Clara moved through the crowd, a phantom herself, unnoticed, watching the faces of the harvest keepers. They seemed to hum with a quiet anticipation, their eyes gleaming with a fanatical fervor. She saw the mayor, his usually jovial face now etched with grim determination, speaking in low tones to Mr. Henderson. Their gazes occasionally flickered towards the edge of the cornfield, towards the darkness that was beginning to swallow it. Suddenly, a cold wind whipped through the square, carrying with it a faint, sweet, metallic scent. The same smell from the well. The lanterns flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe like hungry tendrils. A low, keening wail seemed to emanate from the heart of the cornfield, cutting through the forced merriment of the festival. The townsfolk shivered, some murmuring prayers, others simply looking away, their faces pale. Clara knew. Ilara was here. Her spirit, restless and enraged, was signaling her presence, perhaps warning them, perhaps urging Clara on. She glanced at her wrist. Her own watch, which had been perfectly functional, had stopped. Its hands were frozen at 11 o'clock. She looked up at the old church clock tower in the town square. It too was stuck. Its large hands pointing squarely at 11. A chill snaked up her spine. The clocks, all stopped at the precise hour the ritual was about to begin. The town and time itself seemed to be holding its breath. She looked at the dense, dark wall of corn, the terrifying silhouette of the scarecrow just visible against the darkening sky. Her moment of truth was here. She had to go into the fields. She had to find the meeting house. She had to expose Havenwood's horrifying secret, and in so doing, find a twisted form of peace for herself and for Ilara Thorne.
The air within the cornfield was thick, cloying, smelling of damp earth and decay, a stark contrast to the festive chaos of the town square. Clara pushed through the dense stalks, the dry leaves scratching against her clothes like skeletal fingers. The moonlight, when it managed to penetrate the canopy, cast long, grotesque shadows that danced around her, playing tricks on her already frayed nerves. Every rustle of the stalks, every snap of a dry branch sounded like a footstep behind her. She followed the crude map in Ilara's diary, her flashlight beam cutting a trembling swath through the inky blackness. The entries spoke of a path known only to the harvest keepers, marked by ancient carvings on trees, symbols she now recognized as the same vine-like patterns from the carved wooden box. Deeper into the field she went, the sounds of the festival fading behind her, replaced by the relentless whispering rustle of the corn and a faint, rhythmic chanting that seemed to pulse from the very heart of the field. It was low, guttural, a primal sound that sent shivers down her spine. The scent of dried blood was stronger here, mixed with something else, a cloying sweetness that made her stomach churn. Suddenly, the stalks thinned, and Clara found herself in a clearing. Moonlight, unimpeded, spilled down, illuminating a horrifying scene. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, gnarled oak tree, its ancient branches draped with garlands of dried corn, animal bones, and what looked disturbingly like human hair. Around the tree, arranged in a precise circle of rough-hewn stones, stood a dozen figures, their faces obscured by the shadows cast by the tree. They wore dark robes, some with hoods, others with grotesque masks made of dried gourds and corn husks. Among them, Clara recognized the hulking silhouette of the mayor and the lean, wiry frame of Mr. Henderson. They were chanting, their voices rising and falling in a monotonous drone. Before the tree, on a flat altar-like stone, lay a young woman. Her arms were splayed, her eyes wide and unseeing, and a single, child-sized shoe lay beside her, identical to the one Clara had found in the attic. Her hair, long and dark, splayed across the stone. It was Ilah, or a chilling doppelganger. Her face was pale, almost luminous in the moonlight, a silent scream frozen on her lips. As Clara watched, horrified, a figure emerged from the shadows beneath the oak tree. Taller than the others, his robe was darker, more ornate. His face was unmasked, and Clara gasped, a silent sob caught in her throat. It was Silas Thorne, Ilara's father, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying fanaticism, his face etched with a lifetime of grim duty. He held a small, wickedly sharp sickle in his hand. The chanting intensified. Silas Thorne raised the sickle. Clara knew this was it. The culmination of decades, centuries of horrifying tradition. Ilara's spirit, she realized, wasn't just a victim. It was a warning, a desperate plea for her to stop this, to break the cycle. Her own grief for Lily, her inability to save her sister, fueled a desperate surge of courage. She could save this girl. She could give Ilara the peace she had been denied. With a defiant cry that seemed to tear through the oppressive silence, Clara burst from the shadows, Ilara's diary clutched in her outstretched hand. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice raw with terror and outrage. "Stop it! This is murder!" The chanting ceased abruptly. All eyes, those hidden by masks and those chillingly bare, turned towards her. Silas Thorne froze, the sickle poised. His eyes, when they met Clara's, held no recognition,
only a cold, ancient fury. "An intruder," someone hissed. "A defiler." "You are making a mistake," Clara yelled, holding up the diary. "This is Ilara Thorne's diary. She wrote it all down. You murdered her." Silas Thorne's face twisted into a snarl of rage. "Silence, witch! You know nothing of the ancient pacts. The land demands its due. Without the blood, Havenwood will wither." He pointed the sickle at her. "Seize her! She will be the offering." The robed figures surged forward, a silent, menacing wave. Clara turned to run, but the cornfield seemed to turn into a labyrinth, the stalks closing in around her, the shadows elongating, twisting into monstrous shapes. She heard the frantic whispers of Ilara's spirit, now sounding less mournful and more desperate, urging her to escape. She stumbled, her ankle twisting, and fell hard onto the damp earth. A rough hand seized her arm, dragging her back towards the altar, towards Silas Thorne, towards the waiting sickle. The terrified girl on the altar stirred, her eyes fluttering open, meeting Clara's with a brief, desperate plea. Clara knew then that this was not Ilara. This was another girl, another victim, chosen for the harvest. And if Clara failed, she would be next.
Rough hands dragged Clara towards the altar, her mind reeling. The chanting resumed, a discordant, feverish thrum. Silas Thorne's face was a mask of fanaticism, his eyes burning with an ancient, terrifying belief. The sharp edge of the sickle glinted in the moonlight, poised to claim another life. Just as the robed figures were about to force her onto the cold stone, Clara saw it. Hanging from a branch of the ancient oak tree, swaying gently in the wind, was a single, tarnished antique mirror. It was small, no bigger than her palm, almost hidden amongst the bones and dried corn. It was identical to the one in her grandmother's hallway, only this one seemed to pulse with a faint, ethereal glow. A desperate idea sparked in her mind, a fleeting thought that felt both insane and profoundly right. Ilara's spirit wasn't just warning her, it was guiding her. The mirror, the focal point of so many of Ilara's manifestations, was here for a reason. With a surge of adrenaline, Clara twisted, struggling against her captors. She kicked out, catching one of the robed figures in the knee, sending him sprawling. As the others momentarily faltered, she lunged towards the oak tree, her hand outstretched, fingers scrabbling for the small metal mirror. Her fingers closed around its cold metal frame. "You want your harvest?" Clara screamed, tears streaming down her face, a desperate, guttural cry that echoed Ilara's own defiance. "Then see what you've sown." She wrenched the mirror free from the branch, turned, and with a final desperate burst of strength, smashed it against the altar stone directly in front of Silas Thorne. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack, fragments of silvered glass scattering across the stone and the prone body of the terrified girl. As the mirror broke, a blinding spectral light erupted from its shards, momentarily blinding the harvest keepers. A collective gasp rose from the robed figures, and then, from within the light, a torrent of images erupted, swirling and coalescing in the air above the clearing like a horrific projection. They were visions of Havenwood's past sacrifices. Young men and women, their faces contorted in terror, being dragged to the altar. The faces of the ancestors of the current harvest keepers, grim and unfeeling, performing the brutal rituals. The cornfields turning red blood beneath a mocking sun. And then finally, Ilara Thorne,
her scream silent but palpable as the sickle fell. Her eyes, wide with betrayal and despair, stared directly out at the assembled cultists, their own ancestors among the perpetrators.
The spectral images flashed with agonizing speed, raw and visceral, revealing the truth in all its horrifying detail. The cultists, caught in the terrifying spectacle, recoiled, some clutching their heads, others collapsing to their knees, whimpering in terror. The centuries of unspoken horrors, the monstrous legacy they had blindly inherited and perpetuated, were laid bare before their eyes, forced upon them by the shattered mirror, Ilara's final act of defiance. Silas Thorne stared, his fanaticism crumbling, replaced by a dawning, shattering comprehension. He saw his own father, his own grandfather, reflected in the ghostly tableau, their hands stained with innocent blood. The sickle slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the stone. The chanting died, replaced by gasps and cries of horror and disbelief. The spectral images faded, leaving behind only the lingering scent of old blood and the profound, echoing silence. The young woman on the altar, freed from the hypnotic grip of the ritual, stirred, her eyes wide, but now filled with a bewildered hope. Suddenly, a gust of wind, cold and pure, swept through the clearing, rustling the cornstalks with a sound like a sigh of release. A fleeting ethereal form, shimmering like moonlight on water, rose from the broken mirror shards. It was Ilara Thorne, whole and luminous, her face serene, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She looked at Clara, a silent acknowledgement, a profound gratitude passing between them. Then, with a whisper that was carried on the wind, "Thank you for seeing," she dissolved into the air, finally at peace. The first rays of dawn were just breaking, as Clara, battered and bruised, but strangely resolute, walked out of the cornfields, leading the terrified girl by the hand. The harvest keepers remained in the clearing, scattered and broken, their faces pale and horrified, their ancient pact shattered, their monstrous secret exposed not by force, but by truth. The following days were a blur. The terrified girl, whose name was Sarah Miller, a distant cousin of Agnes, was safe. Clara and Agnes went to the authorities, presenting Ilara's diary and Sarah's testimony. The investigations were slow, met with resistance, but the truth, once unleashed, could not be contained. Havenwood's dark legacy was finally brought to light, its prosperity built on a foundation of terror and blood. The mayor and several other prominent figures were arrested. The ancient oak tree was deemed a crime scene. Clara stayed in Havenwood for a few more weeks, not out of fear, but a strange sense of obligation. She cleaned her grandmother's house, packed her belongings, but this time the clocks in the house remained silent, their frozen hands no longer mocking but commemorating. The hallway mirror, though repaired, no longer held frightening reflections, only her own changed face. She drove away from Havenwood under a clear autumn sky. The cornfields, no longer menacing, stretched out under the sun, their stalks rustling with a gentle, ordinary sound. The guilt over Lily's death still lingered, a dull ache, but it was no longer consuming. She had faced a darkness far greater than her own personal tragedy, and in exposing it, in fighting for another's peace, she had found a fragile, unexpected fragment of her own. Havenwood would never be the same, and neither would Clara Vance. The whispers in the stalks had finally been silenced, replaced by the quiet, hopeful rustle of a new beginning.
And that concludes the chilling tale of Whispers in the Stalks. I hope you had a truly memorable sleepless night with Clara and Ilara. Havenwood's secret has finally been exposed, but will the hauntings truly disappear? Thank you for joining Murmurs at 3 a.m. on this terrifying journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next chilling stories. See you again in the darkness for the next tale.